Okay, hopefully this is the last in the road before I can do all my grand strategic World War II games. Triumph and Tragedy. Just picked this up in the fall sale. I saw this at Consim World Expo, and it looked really interesting. I think the first copy in the US was being played there. And since then, it's gotten good reviews, good reception from the community as a whole. So even though it's a block game, and I gotta tell you, I'm no big fan of block games, there's enough going on in this that it convinced me, you know what, I'm gonna give this a try, mainly because my hope was, and maybe still is, that it's going to be a replacement for me for, and it won't fully, I'll still play it because I'm away. Good old Avalon Hill's Hitler's War. Hitler's War has a lot of problems, and this game gives an overview of the war starting in 36, going in Europe again, on a very light level. You know, you can play it supposedly in an evening, say about 6 hours. It's got, you know, some new techniques to the design. You're not going to be record keeping all the different, you know, costs of items and such not. Yet it still manages to handle diplomacy, diplomacy, something that Hitler's War doesn't bother with, right? Because Hitler's War starts in 39. Everything's predetermined at that point. So this is actually better, you know? It's kind of like, let's combine origins of World War II with Hitler's War, which would be a beautiful matchup. It also stands somewhat in the space of games like Gathering Storm and Days of Decision, in that, you know, I get to play that pre-war period, right? And then play a war game based on it. Well, we hope. I'm not fully set up yet. I'm doing what I can, but honestly, some of the setup involves decisions by the players. I don't like to make those until I'm fully up on the rules. Speaking of which, we're gonna, of course, have a rules introduction, but I have to say, if you're looking at me to explain the rules to you, you're looking to the wrong place. Marco has his review, which gives a fairly good overview of the rules. Not a lot of detail in them. And then Stuka Joe has, but I mean, Marco gives you a really good idea of what the game's going to be like and about. And then Stuka Joe goes into some really nice detail. He's doing a series of instructional videos. So you're not going to watch this to learn the game from me, unless you particularly like following along with someone who's struggling with the rules as your means of learning. Because this is completely new to me. Let's go back to the block game concept, because that's one of the big hurdles here. It's why I didn't pre-order this. So when I first saw this last year, 3 games were coming, well, over the last couple of years, there have been 3 big games on pre-order availability, P500, through GMT. This one, Mark Herman's Churchill, and geez, I can't remember the guy. His name's Scott Muldoon, I think, but I don't know. But his Cataclysm, and I looked at all 3, and in any given time period, had only one of them been available, I'd pre-order it. Even this, knowing it's blocks, I'd say, you know, I'll give it a shot. Well, after looking at them all, Cataclysm was the one that interested me the most. And this is the same situation I got in with Unconditional Surrender. Unconditional Surrender came out at the same time as Supreme Commander, and I had decided to back Unconditional Surrender by putting an order in. And then I said, you know what? I don't really need another strategic World War II game. Yeah. And since then, what have I bought? Boom, I've managed to make sure I had that collected up. I got this. I don't know what else. But anyway, yeah, I'm unable to resist a game. World War II strategic, the grand strategic, has always been something that interested me. I tend to shy away from World War II, especially the focus on the tactical stuff, but even when I start griping about how many World War II games there are, I can't stay away from these big ones, even, you know, the big scope. So anyway, when I went on the list, this looked interesting, almost as interesting as Cataclysm. Probably the deciding factor was these blocks. It was, hey, I don't want to pay, you know, an extra 20, 30 bucks to have a bunch of wood that, to tell you the truth, I find really annoying, right? Not only does it take up more space, but then you've got this, you know, rotating values, which I find hard to understand. And then something else as I was putting this together that I noticed and reading the rules and everything, you know, there's no movement value on these guys. The combat value on the dots is fine, but the movement, I've got to look up the movement for each unit. It reminds me in that sense of Terrible Swift Sword system, where they didn't bother to put movement numbers on the counters. Now that worked okay because there were only a couple different types. Here there's several different types of units, all with different movement allowances, I think. And we have them spelled out on a per unit basis, but we don't have a simple, you know, single place where it gives me all the movement costs. I've got this detailed information on each unit type. We'll see how used to it I get. It's probably not going to be that big a deal, but it's one of the problems with blocks is you're spending so much effort on the single counter to, and yeah, I can't, that's another problem. I'm not very good at stickering them. I'm sure that would improve with the practice, but it does take longer than clipping counters, which is optional anyway. Anyway, the problem is you can't have information on the blocks that, because of the step loss reduction being the primary focus on the blocks. And, you know, it really limits the amount of information that you can put on a counter, and it limits the complexity of the game. That may be some of what people who like blocks like, is they know they're getting a block game. They know it's not going to be one of these beasts with, you know, 18 numbers on a single counter, right? But I see numbers on a counter as being kind of the reason that we don't play with minis, that we play with some other solution, because we can deliver more information that way. And the blocks really fail at delivering information. A single status counter could show how many step losses there are, or you could have reduction counters or whatever. However, the block handles this in its own way. One that I find disturbing to begin with. Anyway, like I said, don't look at me for explaining the rules, but I am going to go through them because it'll help me to learn the rules. I have read them. I'm about halfway through the playbook because I was tired last night and it seemed like a good thing to read. Okay. So we go over what we have, a map divided into areas. Some of the areas are very small areas and they're blown up like this, I guess. I didn't catch that very clearly from the map. The colorings are based on the nation involved. Now, this is going to be a three-sided conflict with Britain as the major power, Russia, and Germany. But there's something kind of interesting here, which is that there's kind of aligned, not quite minor countries, but lesser countries. So like France and the US are considered lesser countries to the great power that controls them, London, Britain. And, you know, if you follow some of the conspiracy theories, this all makes sense. I think Russia doesn't have any minors, but then Germany is going to have Italy as its lesser power. In order to win the game, there are going to be several different opportunities, but one of them is to take a couple of these capitals. We have other lesser cities like actual minor capitals, so like Turkey has a capital. And then we have countries that don't have a capital at all. All they have is a city in them. And then we have this divided up here, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be on the national balance sheet, so you're just going to have... Oh, it's over here on the map key. Cool. Where it gives the amount of population in each location and the muster value for troops that it might have. There's an important concept of home territory and colonies. So, you know, Britain's home territory is Great Britain itself. It's a little darker color. The colonies are spread out over here. If you're going to build troops, you generally have to build them in your home territory of that country. And the countries have colors. So, for example, Italy, and no, these aren't Italian colonies, will build its troops only in Italy itself, even though it might have colonies elsewhere. You can build fortresses, though, in just controlled territory. They're the one exception to that. Minor nations, if you align them diplomatically, they have an intrinsic defense in fortification values, which is going to be these things. If you end up aligning them diplomatically, those convert to your choice of units. So you get to kind of configure their force, which could be purely defensive because you just want their space, or you could actually get some military units that you can use to invade Russia. Like all block games, the little pips on it is essentially a steps. They call it combat value. I find that a little disturbing. I like the steps terminology better, so I'm going to just use that. Units have movement speed, which differs between whether they're over land and sea. Notice something interesting here. Infantry and armor have a sea movement value. It's assumed you move them out to sea, you've got the transports to carry them. It's an abstraction. Hey, it works, you know. And that's how many areas they'll be able to move maximum in a turn. Now, you don't get to move all your pieces in a turn, though. You're going to be using these command cards, which allow you to shift your pieces around. So you have to have a combination of movement allowance and command cards to use them. We have a number of different classes of units listed here. They also have what I'll call a to-hit ratio, or a value, their firepower, whatever. This is the number that they need to hit different types of units. So here, a fortress hits A, which I think is air units, on a 1 or a 2. It hits naval units on a 1 through 3. It hits ground units on a 1 through 4, and submarines on a 1 through 3. It's going to roll a number of dice equal to its steps. Total buckets of dice game here. And you, I believe, target specific classes of units. Well, obviously you target air, naval, ground, or and then the losses are allocated, I believe, by whichever units are strongest. You can remove your own units from play. Think of the background for the different factions and how they might have different approaches. So, you know, they say the West should be focused on economic progress. Well, you know. You have some informational blocks on these informational tracks here. One of the most interesting is the reserve block. It has another side, or resource block. That's going to be the count of your little resources. Resources are important to production, but only if you're at war. There's two other elements to production. which is population and industry. And what will happen is your production total available for each turn is going to be the lowest of those three. I got that one right. With one proviso, you don't need the resources when you're not at war, which is to say you're able to buy things on the open market. You don't need to have a strategic reserve for that. We also have these hand size limits, which are the number of cards that you're allowed to have at the end of not a turn, but a particular segment of the game, during which you grab a bunch of cards and then you have to play them. This is the current turn marker. It's going to be passed around and it's got arrows on it which may indicate which way it flows. I'm not sure. Somewhere near Norway? Oh. There's supposed to be some sort of chart that tells you whose turn it is, and I ain't seeing it. Well, there's supposed to be a chart that tells you who's going to be going at any given time. And I'm sure it's on here. It's just a very, very busy map. And I am unable to notice it. This is going to keep track of the different segments within a turn. And I'm going to back away because I need to find that chart. I can't play without it. I guess for reading the playthrough, it talked about something near Norway. It was this number up here. At the end of each track, and yeah, I totally didn't catch this, there's a number. And there's 6 of those numbers total. You roll a die. If you roll a 1, Germany goes first, and the path goes this way. If you roll a 2, the axis goes first, but it goes this way. And likewise, we've got numbers in each position. So we can, because there's only 3 players, we can get any possible configuration off of one die roll. That's very nice. I'm not sure, what it represents, what it doesn't. It's kind of like a chit pull almost, except you know the order at the beginning. It totally randomizes the order of play each time. Okay. So let's, for setup, you're going to have a number of cadre strength units, which is 1 point strength units, on the board at the beginning of the game. You get some choice as to what you place. You also get some fixed units depending on the country. So like the Maginot Line, and I forgot to look this up, when the Maginot was completed, ends up being a full strength fortress here, and that's indicated by this. That seems a little extreme to me. I seem to remember that Maginot at least was being worked on during this period, and so it probably shouldn't be full strength to begin with. I don't know how heavily that decision making was involved during this period. Okay. The base sequence of play, each year you push this sucker forward, and then you go to a sequence based on the different segments. In the new year, the first thing you do is you check for victory. Well, what's an economic victory? 16.2. I thought that was at the end of the game. If you have 25 victory points, you win the game. And what are victory points? Well, we'll see. Some of them are in here. One of the things you do is you shuffle this up, And each player who is not at war, who hasn't fought a battle with anyone, draws one of these, and that's victory points they have. Most of them are zeros. There are very few twos. We mark the turn order based on the die roll I was talking about, and then we do production. So for production, you're going to take the least of the industry, population, and resources, with infinite resources if you're at peace. If your stuff was blockaded, you may not be able to access it. And then blockade markers are removed. And you're going to get a certain amount of points of production, which you mark with this. And then you can spend those. And you're able to build up units and buy cards. Each card or unit you buy costs you only 1 production point. This is kind of a big deal because, you know, most games charge you more for armor or something, but armor is less effective in some circumstances than infantry. And that cost difference is going to be related to the fact they've decided armor units are going to be smaller, say corps instead of army groups or something like that, than the equivalent infantry unit. And that all makes sense. I mean, if you're building ships and air units, they're obviously not the same size as infantry. And there's a larger support staff for the mechanized stuff. So, you know, it all kind of works out when you think about it, at least to some extent. But you can also buy cards. And you can buy cards from either the action deck or the investment deck. The investment deck is going to be based on technologies and factories that you can improve. The action deck is based on diplomacy on the 2 ends. This is the thing. So these guys have stuff on the 2 ends that are technologies. These guys have diplomacy on the 2 end, and then they have action commands. Commands is what they're called. So this is a fall command. It can be used during the fall. I don't know what the P means. P is turn order, and 6 is the number. Now, you buy a handful of cards, so you have some choice as to which commands you want to play, what diplomacy you want to do, whatever. And whatever your focus at a particular time is may better determine which cards you want to prioritize. So it might be important that you get diplomacy done, but the diplomacy might fall to 2nd or 3rd tier late in the game, and it's more important to choose particular military units. Possibly even over a diplomacy you really want to do. Some of the diplomacy will, of course, be negated by countries disappearing and such not. Okay. For buying unit steps, well, first of all, you can buy new units, and then you can also add 1 step to each existing unit, and those also cost a point each. And then you can place new units, yeah, in that order. You can't build up units if they're at sea, engaged in battle, or unsupplied. I believe fortresses can be unsupplied, though. Fortresses are special. They can be built anywhere in undisputed friendly territory, even if they're unsupplied. They must be built in major power or colonial territory for a major power. Great power anywhere else. So the major power is something like France. The great power is the main player. You don't look at any of your cards until you buy everything you're planning on buying. Okay. Then we're going to be doing a government phase. And during this, the players are going to be playing their cards one after the other. And there's a number of different options that they have. They can play diplomacy cards. You only play 1 card when you do this. So let me go over the base flow of the government phase. The government phase, Whoever's the first player has the first option to play a card. And then each player in turn has an option to make a card play. You can pass if you like. If all three players pass, the government phase ends and people have to discard down to their hand maximums. And that's important because if you have too many cards, other people can kind of sit back and say, well, you're losing more than us. We'll let the turn go. Okay. So diplomacy uses one card. You play it face up. Wrong deck. You play it face up, representing the country you want to do diplomacy on. And essentially, that's 1 point of influence in that country. It's not recorded immediately. Someone else could cancel it out by playing the same card or whatever. Most of the diplomacy gets resolved all at once simultaneously. So it's kind of to your disadvantage to play these early because they telegraph, you know, where you put your investment. Other people might have cancellation cards more easily. On the other hand, if it's an important country, you're going to want to cancel it anyway, so who cares? For technology, you have to play 2 cards of matching types. So for example, I could play 2 atomic research, except these are not the same. They have a number on them. They have to have the exact same thing on them. So I could play 2 heavy bombers. Now I have 2 choices with this. I could play it out in the open, and now I've just revealed I have that technology. Alternatively, I could tuck them under my side of the board, and I have to do them in the order that I create them. I'm going to do them left to right along the tracks. And this becomes a secret technology. Nobody knows about it. Now there are things like spy cards, like this industrial espionage, which allow me to peek at someone else's card. Or cards that they've got hidden. Those cards that you've hidden, gee, it sounds like a good idea because you can reveal them at any time. You know, hey, I need heavy bombers. Those sound good. You know, I like this Air Force's Move 3. It sounds really useful to me. Well, if I'm going to have that hoarded behind the lines as a hidden card, that counts against, that pair counts as 1 card against my hand limit. So my normal hand limit would be 7. Well, if I had one of them, I'd mark it down as 6, just as a reminder of what I can actually have. Okay. Industry cards. It costs a certain amount to build industry in any given faction. So for example, at the beginning of the game, it costs the Axis 5 factory points. What I can do is I discard factory points equal to or more than my cost, and I can raise my industry level by 1. That's not helping my production yet. I got to get some population for that to work. And of course, like in Gathering Storm and World in Flames, you have to get these Days of Decision. You have to get these matches together in terms of production to be able to produce what you need. And that's an important facet in both of those games. Unfortunately, that doesn't carry over to A World at War. Gathering Storm had the pairing situation, I believe, of what you wanted to have. I'm trying to remember now. I seem to remember it. Obviously, Days of Decision, World in Flames has that. Resources and factories. And I think it's nice to carry it over on a very, very light game because it's not that complex an idea. Intelligence, yeah. So if I want to, I can play this as an espionage card, as my card play. And then I'm allowed to execute its instructions. Well, in this case, I'm allowed to look at somebody else's tech, and I can pair it with one of their with one of the techs that I saw if I have a card of that type. So for example, in the earlier example, if this guy has the heavy bombers paired, well, and then I play this on him, if I had a heavy bomber in my hand, I could match it with this. And now I've got a tech a little bit more easily than he does. And I believe that cannot, I don't remember if that can be secret or not. You'd have to look that up. You can pass. That costs you nothing. Okay. Once we're done with that, we do diplomacy. And what we do is everybody counts up the points they have in each country, and whoever has the most gets that much of a leaning towards that country. And I think it's basically, there's 3 levels, but we'll see when we hit here. It may just be 2. No, it's 3. And then you have to discard down to your hand size. Now, let's just hit diplomacy before I go on. I'm going to need a break very shortly. When you actually resolve the diplomacy values, if it ends up that nobody has any advantage on it, it's just a neutral country. If somebody ends up with 1 point in it, they get to use the population and resources of that country. But the minor is it's just an economic penetration. And anyone who invades it has to violate its neutrality. A protectorate's the next level. You'll have population and resources from then on. If a rival, another player, essentially one of their powers, attacks the protectorate, they have to declare war on the protector as well as violating neutrality. And the protectorate immediately becomes a satellite of the protector. So this is a way to, like, give somebody territory, but unfortunately you can't unwar. If you violate a country that is not a protectorate or higher from someone, they end up an armed neutral. And that's when they just get fortresses and don't really get to shoot, but not the same way. If you get it up to 3 or more influence, it actually just becomes part of your empire. It's just so allied and so aligned that you convert its troops to your own great power, major power, I can't remember what's what. I think great power, and you can operate them as if they're your own from then on. And it is a permanent situation. No one can attack it without a declaration of war, and I don't believe there's any violation of neutrality when somebody aligns a country to that level. Now, there are some diplomatic wild cards. Like this one. I haven't seen him before. Remove a listed faction's influence marker from a listed neutral nation. So the West could remove somebody's influence from one of these nations. The Axis has a different set of nations. And these are just some events that are in there, essentially, that you have some capability to play. So, while the events aren't as richly detailed as they are in, say, most CDGs, there is some hint of that CDG flavoring coming in on these. The big thing, though, is you've got these multiple uses for the cards that you draw. And that's going to be interesting. When you play one of these, you take its effect, and it takes effect immediately, rather than having to wait till the diplomacy comes around. The USA is a neutral major power. It can be influenced by diplomacy. It begins as a neutral. But no one... the Axis and the USSR can't gain it in any positive sense. They can get influence in it up to level 3, but all that is improving its isolationism as a barrier against other powers. On the other hand, the West's influence has the normal effects on levels 1 and 2, and then once it goes to 3 or more, we turn it to a Western satellite. And I think the big advantage with that is the US comes in with some troops. The cost of Western factories goes down by 1, and US forces start arriving. They get troops kind of automatically just baked in addition to whatever economic value they've been putting in play. The West automatically gets influence bonuses in the U.S. at the start of 42, 43, and 44, and that's marked here. Is it 1, 2, and 3? No, it's just one each. If the USA neutrality is violated, the West can't do so. It immediately becomes a satellite, except it immediately gets its 42 forces, its 43 forces arrive early, etc. All right, we're going to take a break here. Okay, as we continue, and yeah, it's been a long time. Through the rules, the technology section, I mostly covered that, even though that's where I've got my edge there. The atomic bomb is separated into multiple different technologies. I believe you have to achieve them in order, yeah. And you can only do one stage per year. If you manage to get the entire atomic bomb completed, that's one of the victory conditions. Otherwise, you get some victory points for it. Okay, the different seasons, and this is basically the turn order track, right? You go New Year, production, we did that. Government is what we just did. Now we're in the spring. Okay, so spring, summer, fall, the blockade in between, and then winter. Now winter is kind of weird in this. Only the USSR can play during the winter, and from the playbook, I don't remember this from the rules, but I'm sure we'll hit it, they can only play inside Russia itself. That seems somewhat counterintuitive because there were campaigns in the winter everywhere else. It's just an abstraction, I guess, to give the USSR an advantage for winter offensives. Anyway, there are different kinds of intelligence cards. We had the industrial here, which actually does not appear to be an intelligence card. I don't know. These are campaign cards rather than investment card. No, that's an investment card. I don't know. It doesn't specify. It's got a picture here, so maybe that's an agent or one of these things there, or maybe the wording is wrong and doesn't match properly. I am not sure. Okay. So the first thing you do is in turn order, each person's allowed to commit a command card. Again, out of their hand of cards. And one thing you'll notice is the two decks have the same back, and that's important because you might not know what the other guy has built up and what they've purchased. Okay, so you commit a command card face down, or you can pass. If you've already played a card face down, you're done. You will pass from then on. If everybody passes in a row, the command portion is done. However, what it means is someone can play a command card and then you can react if you passed, because you'll get another opportunity to do so. And these are going to be what you use to move your units. Now, when you play a command card, you have to play it for the correct season that it is. So this can only be played in the spring. I believe the Soviets can play any of them during the winter. If you fail, if you don't have the right card for the season that you want to play, you can still play a card and it's an emergency command, and you get a limited number of points for that. 2 for the Allies, 2 for the Russians, 4th for the Axis. By the way, I'm a little weird on the Axis including Italy guaranteed, and for that matter, perhaps Britain including France guaranteed. Although the alignment of Britain and France's goals were a little bit closer. At the beginning of this game starts back in 36. The German-Italian, there was certainly a great deal of friendliness between the fascist powers, but there was also not insignificant amounts of tension. And Given Italy's history in the past, and given how they handle the minor countries where they can align wherever they fall, basically, it does seem a little odd, but I guess it's a play balance thing to make that decision. Okay. A command card is made up of 3 pieces of information: when you can play it for full effect, the number of points it gives you for full effect, and then a priority letter, which is what order they come into play when you take your turn. Then in command order, the order of the letters, you take your player turns, which will be movement and combat. And then if you're at war, you have to check your units for supply. And also at the end of the summer season, you have to check to see if you've got a blockade against some of your trade routes, which could prevent some of your population and resources from making it back to your capital. Okay. Actual movement is basically you can move freely through friendly territory, but everything except for air forces and submarines has to stop if it enters in an enemy-occupied area. These can actually move through enemy-occupied areas. They spend 1 command point per space per unit. This is per unit, not per step, so big, heavy units are more important, although they're less able to be broken up and defend a frontier, right? You can't enter a rival territory of any kind without declaring war on them, which has to be made before you move any units. And you can't enter a neutral territory unless you're declaring a violation of neutrality to allow the neutral to drop his troops on the board, which is pretty much these forts here. And those are determined by the size of the capital of the country. Well, they might be more than one place. So, for example, here Warsaw and Lvov both are going to produce, and even a town has a muster value. So every space there, I think, gets a unit. Okay. You have a movement allowance limit for each of your units, which, for example, no. Obviously fortresses don't move, but I saw this only 1 per area, and I was thinking, there's something weird. Okay, so an air force moves 2 by air, and it can go over land and sea. Now, it's possible you might have technologies that improve that, as we saw with the strategic bombers. You can also do strategic movement, which is double your normal movement range, as long as you go through friendly territory. And that can include open seas, seas that no enemy fleets are sitting in. And as long as you don't engage or disengage, which is entering into combat. You can't combine your strategic movement with normal movement. You'll just be getting that double movement allowance, though. That still costs you, though, the full amount that you'd have to pay to move the unit from your command card. When you leave a battle, okay, when you enter a battle, you're engaging. When you leave a battle area, you're disengaging, and that's whether it's battle by movement or retreat. You can only go into adjacent friendly areas. Unless you're retreating, you can keep moving, but you're not allowed to re-engage. Subs and air forces are allowed to disengage into adjacent areas that are disputed or enemy controlled, as long as they move through that area and don't remain there, which would be a re-engagement. If you're unable to disengage, you must remain in battle. Each border between 2 areas has a limit. So you have that written here. So for example, planes, which is the dashed line, you can send up to 3 units across a plane's border. If I had more than 3 units I wanted to attack, I'd have to be coming in from different directions. And that's just, you know, the limitations of the supply lines, etc. Why a full-strength infantry unit doesn't count the same as, say, some quantity of lesser strength ones? Yeah, it's just, you know, it's not trying to be too detailed a simulation here, and we are going to find things like that where we say, that's a little weird. presence of friendly ground units in a battle is termed ground support. Okay, we're not there yet. Okay, battle groups. Okay, when you when you move a force of air, naval, and sea units, they have to move together from one location into a sea battle, and only one of these collections moving together will engage at first. So if you move multiple battle groups in, only one joins the sea battle for each combat round. And in this case, you might want to cluster your forces or get them together. But the problem is, of course, you have the limits here. Now, I don't see any border limit for sea areas. So you may be able to move everything across a sea border. Moving across a coast, though, you can only move one. I think that's into a coast, not coming out, but I'm not sure. Let's see. They only involve ground units, and you're not going to be sending too many ground units into a battle or out of a battle at sea. They do not apply to at sea, air, naval, or submarine units on land. Okay, so we can ignore stuff in the air and naval. When you go into an area that you have that someone else has troops in and you do not, you are performing an aggression, and you're going to be required to attack for doing that. Normally, attacking is voluntary. If you make an aggression with air, naval, or sea units without ground support, it's a raid. And raiders aren't allowed to conquer territory, nor can they block a retreat from battle. They can't raid unoccupied enemy territory unless they're doing strategic bombing. They may enter occupied enemy territory without restriction, starting a new battle or reinforcing an existing one, whether they're raiding or not. Ground units count as ground support. Great. Okay, we're going to pause for the combat. I've gotten, this isn't a long rule book, but I've gotten kind of easily tired when going through these. The phasing player determines where he wants to actually have battles. The one exception to that is if he was the aggressor this turn, he must fight a battle there. And in each case, well, if it's a land battle, you're going to fight a single round of combat. If it's a naval battle, or one at sea, you fight as many rounds as it takes. For the land battles, okay, once every unit has taken a combat action, the battle is over. The person who owns the territory, you reveal your pieces at this point when the battle actually occurs. The person who owns the territory turns their pieces back up so they're hidden. The other person remains in place, so you know that he's, I'm not sure of the terms aggressor versus there's another term. One, aggression is moving into the area. There's another term for actually being the guy who's attacking. At the end of each combat, well, at the end of a land combat round, all air naval subs without any ground support have to retreat. These are your raiders. Any active ANSs can rebase if desired, which allows them to pull back. And that's sort of an extra double move that they get. They can sail into a place, fight, sail back out. They can't strategic move and sail out of a place because you can't strategic move into a battle. Okay. For sea battles, you continue fighting rounds until only one side remains, with the exception of hidden subs, or they call them escaped subs. When you're doing a sea battle, at the end of each round of sea combat, all the air units have to rebase. They have to pull out. They fight for one round. Now, this strikes me as weird, because you know, it's not like those areas. First of all, these turns are not short. And secondly, those air units were being patrolling the area and continuously attacking. I'm not sure what it's meant to represent. It may mean that, say, there's an initial attempt at an invasion or something like that, or patrolling the coast. I don't know what that is within air range, because obviously, look, the British planes generally could not cross all the way to Denmark on naval patrols. So, on the other hand, if you're trying to do something, you're trying to do something at sea, right? And if you're just trying to blockade a sea area, well, I don't know. I really don't know, because air units have a movement range of 2, I believe. Which means I could take off from Britain and go patrol the North Atlantic or the Bay of Biscay or whatever. And it makes sense I'd have to rebase in that case, because, man, I don't know how I'm even getting out there. But if that's not the case, if I'm near my coastal area, it seems to me that I'd be able to, you know, like in the Irish Sea, the Brits would be able to keep patrols on that. The English Channel, the Brits would be able to keep planes on that throughout the entire, whatever the length of the battle is, really, unless there was storms or something. So, again, you just kind of have to say, okay, these are the rules for whatever reason. They must have happened. The game does make kind of this claim, we're not a simulation. Okay, fine, you know, but what's going on with this? You know, even Axis and Allies has that, so it allows you to keep planes out in the area fighting. I have to assume there's some sort of play balance reason or something. Anyway, so what's going to happen in each round of combat, whichever type of combat you're doing, and there's only one round in the land combats, is each type of unit is going to get a chance to do something. And it basically has 2 things it can do. It can shoot or it can run. And you go down in order as to what they are. So the first thing to get to do anything are fortresses, and then they have different firepower values, which is their to hit number against different types of units. They roll a number of dice equal to the number of pips they have. And, well, we'll get to what happens. For each hit, so you declare a type that you're attacking, like air units or naval or whatever. For each hit scored, you damage the strongest enemy unit in that class. Now, there's an exception to that. You damage it by 1 level. If carriers or convoys are hit, though, they take 2 hits each because they're just more vulnerable. The owner gets to choose among equivalent combat value units, and if the entire class is eliminated, hey, you know, too bad if you had extra hits coming. You don't get any overshot, like you would in, say, Titan or anything, where you get to assign that. All right. Now, everything below fortresses has a movement allowance, and it could conceivably withdraw from the combat as its combat action instead of taking a fire. And, you know, that's your choice. Land combat, probably less likely that you'll see withdrawals, we'll see. But in naval combat, it seems pretty valid to try to pull out rather than to keep fighting. And that would be considered a retreat. It has to be into an adjacent friendly area, and you have to worry about the border limits for that. Limits to what you can retreat into. You can't retreat into currently resolved battle or battles being resolved still. It has to be into an area that you control. Well, no, that's not enemy, rival, or neutral, which means you could retreat into an area that you have units in that you don't control that has already fought any battles it's going to fight. Okay, so now from defenders, the defenders can't go into the area the attacker engaged from. And for attackers, they can't move back into any area except the ones the one that they engaged in the battle from, if they engaged that turn. It's going to be hard to remember some of this. Oh, the defenders is also that player turn. Ground units can't withdraw into sea areas unless it's a friendly occupied sea area. So you're not going to quickly build some convoys and head off. I guess that's what it's meant to handle. ANS units sometimes have to retreat at the end of land combat. They must retreat if they don't have ground support. And first the aggressor. At the end of sea combat, all air units must retreat, which means they only get one round of sea combat. And ANS units on land must immediately retreat if their ground support is eliminated during a supply phase. Okay, ground units that sea invaded in a turn have been placed face down to indicate they have no combat action that turn. When units are revealed, they're momentarily revealed and then placed upright. Although they can't fire or retreat, they do take hits. So basically an invasion is automatically successful unless you're all destroyed by the defending units. It's kind of weird. Usually it's the opposite. You got to destroy the defenders, right? In a hex and counter game, and then, oh, well, you failed. You're destroyed for not succeeding in the landing. If you have precision bomb sight technology, you can attack enemy industry with your air forces over the capital. And you use the firepower versus the industry at, looks like I1. I don't know what that I is. Oh, I for industry. It hits only on a 1, and each hit destroys 1 point of the enemy's permanent industry. When you raid a territory with ground support, it's a raid battle, or without ground support. It's just like a normal battle, except you can't block enemy retreats. The raiders must retreat at the end of the combat round. Sea battle. Battle groups. Individual battle groups are arranged separately because only one battle group can be entered into the sea battle for each round of combat. One newly engaged unit must join the sea battle at the beginning of each combat round until all the battle groups have been engaged. If the enemy doesn't remain, the active player doesn't have to reveal anything about their uncommitted battle groups. Units at sea are convoys, ground units at sea. They get no combat action. They can neither fire nor retreat, but they can be hit. Boy, are they vulnerable. No retreats or anything. Wow. Even in, what is it? Victory in the Pacific up there, where you have, naval marines or whatever out at sea getting ready for a landing. They have a chance to run away. It's pretty harsh. Or in WIF or Third Reich. Well, okay. Submarine escape. At the end of any sea combat round, subs are allowed to escape from sea combat by disengaging. They flip down out of the battle. They flip so they're face down. And you have to be careful about which way you orient things when you're flipping them back and forth and everything, in terms of, whether they have, so that they keep their proper strength, because that's based on the orientation. So if I have this like this and I reveal it and say, well, it's kind of facing me this way, so it's got 4. Well, then if I do this, I might just confuse the whole world. And, you got to be real careful with that. That's all. Yeah, some of the problems with blocks, right? Yeah, I think I'm going to have trouble with that. Okay, escape subs have no effect on control of a sea area, but they stick around hanging out there, and they're going to be harassing the enemy shipping, and they block enemy trade routes that go through there. They don't affect supply, though. In future movement phases, they're not considered engaged, and they can move accordingly, but in future combat phases, they can either engage or be engaged by enemy units at the option of whoever the attacking player is. So, if you send your subs out, the other guy can keep hunting them. For its combat action, a carrier has the option to fire at N1 at an enemy unit. Now, normally, a carrier fires at N2. And at the same time, it can retreat or rebase from combat. So it fires and doesn't have to stick around and take any losses. And air units, at the end of the sea combat round, all the air units get to withdraw. So they also get to shoot and maybe not get shot back at, you know. But they don't have the bonus the carriers do, which is a strike and a withdrawal at the same time. Then for rebasing, ANS units retreat by rebasing. They must retreat. They must rebase instead of retreating. Active ANS units in an area may rebase, except for escaped subs may not rebase after a battle, after the full battle. And the air forces must rebase. All right, we're going to take another pause as we go into the supply and then the final rules, which are the war and peace and victory. Okay. Now there's a supply phase, supposedly, which doesn't show up on here, even though this is the phase seasonal track. So I don't know when that is, but you check all your ground units, and it's for all factions. So I think this is actually part of the seasonal turn, but for a supply line. Now those supply lines are blocked by enemy possession, if I recall correctly. And I don't know. And you have to be able to trace back to either a main capital or sub-capital. And sub-capitals are these green things. They're things like Paris. Otherwise, you won't be in supply. Now, you have to be in supply during production. You can't build steps, and you can't build up your units, new cadres, if you're in an unsupplied location, except that you can build up fortresses. Is there any other effect to supply? Doesn't look like it. We'll see if there's more going on. But then there's trade routes, which are very similar to supply lines. The only difference is that the flipped over submarines block trade routes as well. And this is running from a given population or resource center. So, you know, notably, we have some population and resources here in India that have to make it over to Britain. Now, the little red is resources that you don't lose if you go all the way around Africa, whereas the black ones must be traced through the Mediterranean or overland. You can't trace them around the coast of Africa. And whatever you can't reach gets these little blockade markers on it to indicate it's not there, and you reduce these little counters rather than the big blocks to indicate that, yeah, you still have those resources or population, but they're not making it the whole way. Now during the summer supply phase, which is I guess not this blockade phase, you can identify enemy pop and resources that are unable to trace a valid link, and you mark them at that point. And then during production, you recheck. Yeah, I guess this is here. So I don't know when there's supply phases otherwise. It looks to me like it only matters in production and in this one blockade phase. Okay, so you recheck to make sure the blockades are proper. I don't know why you did it in the first place. During the production phase, which means after the blockade's laid down, you have to survive fall for it, which comports with what I saw in the playbook. Anyway. So at the beginning of the game, everybody's at peace. And when you're at peace, you get one of these damn things for free. And you collect those up, and those are going to be victory points at the end of the game if victory points matter. You can also ignore the resources during production. You don't get penalized by them, and you'll be paying your initial factory cost for new factories. You do not have to trace supply lines for your trade routes, and you can pass through rival units at sea without having to stop because you're not at war with them. If you want to enter a neutral, you have to declare a violation of neutrality, and we'll get to that in a moment. Now, you can declare war before you move any units in a turn. I don't know if that's before anybody moves any units, or if it's before you move any units. That may be clarified somewhere. Perhaps in the playbook it gives an example that gives it. But anyway, you can't enter other people's stuff except for these straits. You can pass through those if you're not at war with someone. Now the declaration of war is going to flip your peace with marker to indicate that you declared war on them, and it's going to show that you lose a victory point for that. Sorry about that. If instead the opponent declares war on you, it reduces the cost of your factories by 1. So there's a penalty for declaring war and an advantage to being declared war on. Of course, the person who declared war on you probably is going to hit you and do bad things to you. The person who declared war on the turn he declared war, a la World in Flames, gets a surprise attack. Basically, all of his units that are attacking that turn have first fire on the enemy. Normally the defender gets first fire among two different classes, or among the same classes. So for example, if both sides have air forces present, normally the defender would have the air forces shoot first. In this case, the attacker wins that advantage. Now there's also, though, technologies that give you first fire, and if you have those, they negate the attacker-defender situation, including the surprise from a declaration of war. Once you're at war, you will not get a peace dividend. You can enter those enemies that you're at war with and attack their units. You have to check for valid supply lines during every supply phase. Well, see, this every supply phase makes me feel that this is not just a supply phase. These rules are not the most complete as possible, but so we have a command phase within the seasons, which is not marked on here. We have the player turns, and then there's a supply phase at the end of each season. Now, I don't know what happens to you if you don't have supply during those. It doesn't seem like anything actually happens. Let's see. It does. So you lose a strength point off each unit that's out of supply. So that's the thing we are missing is, yeah, it is actually important. Okay. You must check for blockades during summer supply phase, which is marked in the thing where nothing else is. And during production, you have to worry about getting your resources to your home. Now, you can also go to war with miners, and that's just a violation of neutrality, which you can't do against an enemy satellite. You have to declare war against the enemy to get that, or the rival, because we have to be careful with the terminology or something. So the neutral becomes an armed neutral in that case. Now, the first thing that happens is you create a world reaction, which is all of your rivals will draw a number of cards equal to I believe, the population value of the capital that you just declared war on. So, for example, if you declare war on Poland, its capital has a population of 1, so each of your opponents gets 1 card. I thought that was 2. They say 3 for Poland. Well, that's interesting. Now, the muster value. Okay, that's why. All right. So yeah, it is a pile of cards. And these cards are added to your hand and can be used for immediately during play. Now, the armed neutral is going to be a separate faction, not on either side. All influence markers are removed. There will be no more diplomacy on that neutral. And neutral fortresses go in its cities and towns equal to the muster value. If a colony becomes an armed neutral, it may still be violated, and it'll follow these same rules, except that its fortresses will already be on the board. And we'll see that under the surrender rules, I think. Or we already have. If either the rival or violator can roll dice on the armed neutral in combat, but neutral fortresses always target ground units first. If the armed neutral is captured, it's been defeated. If its capital is captured, it's been defeated. At the end of that combat phase, all its units are removed, and the conqueror's control marker goes on its capital, and Pop and Res, I hate acronym or shortenings, but are modified on the charts. If a different faction later captures the capital, the control marker changes. And that capital means that without troops in locations, you control those locations if you manage to capture the capital. Okay. So there's 2 things that other people can do, though. One is partition. And this is a generalization of the Polish partition. And I love generalizations. I think they're, games that have, oh yeah, you can split Poland into 2 pieces or whatever, but nowhere else, kind of are lacking something compared to making this kind of general rule. And so I like this, especially since it works, it doesn't work terribly well with Romania because Bessarabia is not really expressed there. An enemy of the okay, so if an armed neutral is undefeated, any rival player can march into its territory and attack its units, and they don't suffer any violation of neutrality rules. So basically, Germany moves into Warsaw, right? Well, with or without any pact, Russia can move into, and there is no pact, into Lvov and Vilna, and grab eastern Poland. And it gets this additional, in this case, just population, 1 population that it's going to gain. It does have to fight the troops that are there, which are fortresses. The other alternative is if you're an enemy of the violator, if you're at war with the violator, if you put troops in that armed neutral, it turns into a satellite, which means its troops join your major side, and you'll actually replace them with major power troops. And then from then on, they count as territory under your control. Well, unless it gets captured. Okay, what about winning the game? So there's 3 ways to win the game. And the first way is based on victory points alone. If you have a number of victory points equal to your production level, including whatever effects a blockade are in play, +1 for each atomic research level you have, +2 for each enemy main capital or sub-capital controlled, plus any of the peace dividend chits you have, -1 for each declaration of war you made. Remember, that's specified on these counters. Okay. If you end up with 25 or more victory points, you can declare you won. Boom. Possible to win without going to war or anything else. Okay. The next is a military victory. You have to own any 2 enemy main capitals and subcapitals at any time. The third is an atomic victory. If you develop an A-bomb, you win. Okay. So if nobody gets one of these automatic victories, though, we hit 1945, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. We calculate the production level as per 46, and then add up all the victory points. There's rules for a shorter and two-player game. I'm not going to touch those. I haven't read them. But there are rules for surrender of a major power. And I don't remember where that is. Like that may be under capitals or something else. The rules aren't organized terribly well. They're not bad rules, but they're not easy to find things in them. A lot of the information's off on the sidebars. I like sidebars. It's a nice strategy that was taken from the Victory Games stuff, but so we have something about colonies. So Britain, France, and Italy have colonies. If the capital, okay, unless its capital is controlled by another power, a colony becomes an armed neutral when its owning major power is defeated. Okay. I'm not sure I know how something's defeated, though. We just looked at this, and this discusses the armed neutrals, but I don't remember anything in these rules, either on this reading or earlier, about defeating a major power. And that's the kind of thing that Britain, France, and Italy. Here. If a major power's capital is enemy controlled at the end of the combat phase, it is defeated. Place a control marker on the conquering faction in its capital and permanently remove all national units from play. The defeated major power no longer belongs to a faction. And major powers include these. Can great powers be defeated? I don't think great powers can be defeated. I think only major powers can, which would be like France surrendering or Italy surrendering, which makes more sense. The United States surrendering. Uh-oh. That's beginning to get a little ugly. All right. Well, like I said, you don't want to watch my videos for rules if you can help it. And this is a case where I made absolutely no attempt to try to polish them. But some people maybe watch these things for more than just my initial take on things. Some of it may be that I add some commentary. I don't know. I haven't done a whole hell of a lot with this. There are some things that seemed a little weird to me, and I try to note them when I do, rather than just, hey, I'm trying to explain the game, because I don't really care too much about getting the game right in terms of the rules. I'm not into these for competition. I'm into them for the exploration. Is the game itself a good historical representation? And what are the kind of, play effects that the game has without, what's really cool about what it allows, which aren't generally things that involve looking up little tiny rules. It's more the broad scope of it. And, well, there are other people who are better giving broad scope, and other people who are better at teaching you how to play the game. And luckily we have both of those available here for this one, so you don't have to rely on me. All right, we'll get to play. I don't know how quickly I'm going to move through this, because Mesa Music Festival, first time I'm going there, and it's going to be a lot of bands over the course of the weekend, and may interfere with my gaming desires.